Greetings, everyone, from Holcombe in beautiful western Wisconsin, and welcome to another episode of Hidden Chippewa Valley. My name is John Kinville, and today I'm standing near the grave of Frank Sublett Jr., who's one of the first African-American officers in the United States Navy. I hope you will join me, as today we are going to explore the details of the life of one of America's Golden 13. On a busy stretch of two-lane Wisconsin State Highway 27 between Holcombe and Cornell, thousands of vehicles pass by St. Joseph's Catholic Cemetery each day. Few drivers realize that within this quiet burial ground rest the remains of Frank Sublett Jr., a historically significant American who helped break barriers as one of the first black men to integrate the United States Navy's officer corps during World War II. His remarkable journey from a history-making naval career as one of the Golden 13 to his final resting place in Holcombe, Wisconsin, remains an enduring story of freedom and inspiration. Frank Ellis Sublett Jr. was born in Murfreesboro, Tennessee on March 5, 1920. His family later moved to a northern suburb of Chicago, Illinois, in search of better opportunities. There, young Frank attended public schools and graduated from New Trier High School, a nearly all-white school in nearby Winnetka. Growing up, he was known as an industrious, genial, and even-tempered young man who got along with almost everyone he met. After graduation, his academic ability and athletic talent on the football field earned him a place on the roster of the Wisconsin Badgers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison before he ultimately transferred to George Williams College. After 3 years of college, America's entry into World War II brought military service to the forefront of Frank's life. He enlisted in the U.S. Naval Reserve on July 7, 1942, and trained as a motor machinist mate at the all-black Naval Training School in Hampton, Virginia. Upon completion, he was assigned to a Navy machine shop in Boston, Massachusetts, where he worked on submarine detection sonar equipment and repaired auxiliary patrol craft. A dutiful enlistee with a keen attention to detail, Frank quickly rose to the rank of machinist mate first class, building a promising technical career in the Navy. Yet the service remained racially segregated, restricting Frank and other African Americans to strictly non-combat roles and explicitly barring them from serving as commissioned officers. Years earlier, in 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, which prohibited ethnic and racial discrimination by federal agencies or contractors involved in the defense industry. 3 years later, in January 1944, after internal delays within the U.S. Navy and mounting social and political pressure from the black press, civil rights leaders, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, and Assistant Secretary of the Navy Adlai Stevenson, the Navy launched an unprecedented all-black officer training program at Camp Robert Smalls, part of the Great Lakes Naval Training Station north of Chicago, Illinois. 16 black sailors, including Frank Sublett Jr., were methodically hand-selected for the program. They were chosen for their intelligence, physical stamina, and exemplary character, with the expectation that each could endure the internal and external pressures accompanying such a historic change, from subtle resistance to overt verbal or physical acts of racism. Frank was a natural choice. His personal demeanor was measured, likable, and remarkably resilient, able to absorb adversity without dwelling on it or reacting impulsively. In fact, former Commander E. Hall Downs, a white officer in charge at the Hampton base in Virginia, had publicly remarked that he hoped his own son would grow up to be as fine of a gentleman as Frank, a remarkable statement for a white man regarding a black man in the South in 1943. Participation in the program was therefore a given for Frank. He loved the Navy, valued the opportunities it had provided him, and was willing to serve his country in whatever capacity was asked of him. Accordingly, Frank Sublett Jr. was transferred back to Illinois for his historic officer training at the Great Lakes Naval Training Station. Upon his arrival at Camp Robert Smalls, Frank and the other black cadets immediately realized that something was amiss. The Navy's upper brass did not want Frank or any of the other black officer candidates to succeed. To tilt the odds against them, the standard training period was cut in half, from 16 weeks down to just 8. Aware of the obstacles they faced, Frank and his fellow cadets sacrificed sleep for additional night study. They used their blankets to cover the windows of their barracks and studied their manuals by flashlight in their bunks. When the day of the officer exam arrived, all 16 men passed with exceptionally high marks, collectively scoring higher than any officer candidate group in the U.S. Navy's history. Suspicious of their success, Navy leadership, unwilling to believe that a group of black men could outperform their white counterparts, accused them of cheating and required them to retake the exam. Once again, they excelled, setting a Navy record with an average score of 3.89 out of 4. Despite all 16 passing, the Navy commissioned only 13 of the men as officers. While no official explanation was given, by removing 3 of the candidate scores from the group total, the Navy was able to lower the composite average of the men to match that of their white counterparts. In the end, Frank and 12 of his fellow cadets officially made history by successfully integrating the United States Navy's Commissioned Officer Corps. They became collectively known as the Golden 13. Ensign Frank Sublett Jr., now a commissioned officer, returned to Hampton, Virginia, where he instructed young black enlistee sailors in small boat handling. Frank had hoped that his historic commission would earn him a post aboard one of the Navy's famed battleships, preferably in the Pacific Theater against Japan. Unfortunately, Navy brass decided that the integration of the Golden 13 was enough change. Members of the group, including Frank, were restricted to shore-based logistics, non-combat vessels, or training assignments at bases for black sailor units. After his stint at Hampton, Ensign Sublett was transferred to San Francisco, California, where he was promoted to lieutenant, junior grade. There he participated in auxiliary shipyard patrols and served as executive officer of a yard oiler. By mid-1945, just weeks before the end of World War II, Frank was sent to Eniwetok Atoll, a small island in the Marshall Islands chain, where he served as executive officer of a stevedore battalion. After the war, Frank completed his active duty service in February of 1946 and remained in the Navy Reserve until 1952. During the post-war boom of the 1940s and 50s, Lieutenant Junior Grade Frank Sublett Jr., along with the rest of the Golden 13, returned to civilian life. Frank went back to his home in Glencoe, Illinois, where he married and raised 4 children. Professionally, he continued to break barriers, advancing to the position of service manager at a Buick dealership, the first African American to hold such a role in the entire Chicago metro area. Frank also pursued professional modeling, appearing in advertisements for a variety of products and services, including religious attire, automotive tires, department stores, home health care, teleconference gadgets, and major newspapers. By the late 1970s, the Golden 13's historic accomplishments had gained renewed national attention, and Frank and his fellow pioneers began meeting annually. The U.S. Navy, which had once attempted to stymie their rise, came full circle, and had since honored the men with various tributes and memorials, including the Golden 13 building at the Great Lakes Naval Recruit Training Command in Illinois, through which all the recruits pass. Throughout the years, Frank Sublett rarely spoke about his time in the Navy, let alone his historic role. Most casual acquaintances had no idea about that side of his life. Unlike several of the other members of the Golden 13, Frank was likely the most reluctant to share his personal experiences. With his natural live-and-let-live attitude, he especially avoided discussing any negative experiences. He did not hold grudges over the condescension and poor behavior he undoubtedly faced from several white officers and enlisted men, which some others in the group remained troubled by. Instead, Frank preferred to talk about patriotism, the importance of good citizenship, and his appreciation for the Navy. His one lingering critique, however, was that he and the others had been underutilized and could have contributed far more had they been given the opportunity. Even in his later years, Frank maintained the gentlemanly, reserved demeanor that had always defined him. The final decade of Frank's life was likely his most fulfilling. After a failed marriage several years prior, he finally found the love of his life, a public school teacher named Susan, who had moved to Chicago from her native Gilman in northern Wisconsin. The pair met through a mutual friend and shared a similar positive attitude and disposition. As Susan proudly told me with a beaming smile as I met with her, life was easy with Frank. There were no arguments or quarrels with him. He was a slice of heaven. Frank and Susan married and made near-term retirement plans to move to northern Wisconsin. Susan's mother lived near Cornell, and the couple planned to move in with her to help care for her. Frank looked forward to the move, as he enjoyed both the people and the natural beauty of the region, along with the gardening, fishing, hunting, and pontoon rides on Lake Holcombe that awaited him there. With less than a year to go before the move, Frank Sublett Jr. succumbed to heart disease on September 27, 2006, at the age of 86. He was the last surviving member of the Golden 13. Just weeks after his passing, in mid-November 2006, a memorial honoring black naval veterans of World War II was dedicated in North Chicago, bearing his name alongside the other members of the Golden 13. His family, including his widow Susan, attended this ceremony. Susan brought Frank's ashes so he could attend, knowing he would not have wanted to miss it. Upon her retirement from the Chicago public school system, Susan Sublett moved to northern Wisconsin, bringing Frank's cremains with her. She buried his ashes in a small plot at St. Joseph's Catholic Cemetery in Lake Holcombe, Wisconsin, a resting place the couple had purchased together as part of their planned move. Frank Sublett often emphasized the obligation to be a good citizen, a principle he lived out through his service, teaching, and quiet leadership. His life reflected both the challenges and triumphs of breaking barriers in the U.S. Navy. The commissioning of the Golden 13 was not only a turning point for Frank personally, but also a landmark moment in American history, one that opened doors for thousands of African Americans to become naval officers and helped push the Navy and the nation toward greater equality. Today, Frank's final resting place in northern Wisconsin stands as a reminder that his legacy of service, citizenship, and courage belongs not only to the Navy, but also to the community he and Susan chose to call home. Thank you for joining me on this latest episode of Hidden Chippewa Valley with John Kinville, the Golden 13. I also want to take a moment and give a shout out to all the veterans who are watching this. It's people like you and Frank Sublett Jr. that preserve the freedoms that we all enjoy today. Until next time, never forget that together we become witnesses to the past and keep their stories alive.